Story 1. The body of a woman has a way of shutting down her reproductive system when she is raped. Story 2. While Prime Minister, Boris Johnson was questioned about receiving £250,000 a year for writing a newspaper column, compared with the Prime Minister's salary of about £180,000. He described it as chicken feed. He is the same individual who spent £100 million of taxpayers' money on a bridge and never built it. Story 3. We were so broke that Mitt had to sell stock just to put food on the table. Mitt Romney's wife. Story 4. Washington closed the airports during the Revolutionary War. Story 5. Definitely the person who was worried that putting too many people on one side of an island would make the island tip over. Story 6. Not the most out of touch per se, but funny. Sometimes the back door is the wrong door. Hillary Clinton answering a question about cybersecurity and privacy. Story 7. Greg Abbott said Texas will eliminate all rapists from the streets when responding to a reporter who asked why the abortion ban does not make an exception for victims of sexual assault. Fuck Greg Abbott. Story 8. Some claim windmills cause cancer. Others claim they are eating cats and dogs. There are rumors that disinfectant can cure coronavirus disease 2019. We won by a landslide. Story 9. I don't know yet. Every day when I wake up, I hear something that is the most hilariously out of touch thing I have ever heard a politician say, and I expect the same tomorrow. Story 10. They are eating the dogs and cats, the pets of the people who live there. Look, regarding nuclear weapons, my uncle was a great professor, scientist, and engineer, Dr. John Trump at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Good genes, very smart. I attended the Wharton School of Finance, I was a good student, and I built a fortune. If I ran as a liberal Democrat, they would say I am one of the smartest people anywhere in the world. But when you are a conservative Republican, they attack you. That is why I always list my credentials. We are a little disadvantaged. But look at the nuclear deal. It would have been so easy, and it is not as important as these lives. Nuclear weapons are extremely powerful. My uncle explained that to me 35 years ago, and he was right. When you look at what is going on with the 4 prisoners, it comes down to the messenger. They have not realized that women are currently smarter than men. That may take another 150 years. The Persians and the Iranians are strong negotiators, and they have just struck us hard. This is horrible. Story 11. It may not be the most important, but it annoyed me a lot when our prime minister at the time said you do not clean weapons during a war. He has never held a cooking knife if he thinks for a second that anyone would fail to maintain their weapon. Story 12. Reporter. Mr. President, my condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. How are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir? President Trump. I am doing very well. By the way, you see all the trucks? They have just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, something they have been trying to get for about 150 years. It is going to be a beauty, absolutely magnificent. We have just started, so it will get done very nicely, and it will be one of the best anywhere in the world. Story 13. There are too many to choose from. It is probably something about eating pets or about airports during the Revolutionary War. Story 14. We're not going to listen to experts. We just have to beat the hell out of them, liberals. The Nazis treated the Jews with love. Hitler had some good ideas. They're eating the dogs and the cats. Story 15. In the emergency room, they have what are called rape kits. The woman will be cleaned out, basically like a dilation and curettage, and they provide emergency contraception, where they can also do the morning after pill. Representative Jody Laubenberg, Republican, Texas 2013. Note 1. That is not what rape kits are for. Note 2. Representative Laubenberg is a woman. Story 16. The Queen's English was good enough for Jesus Christ, and it's good enough for me. Story 17. Likewise, an old-fashioned term we use is groceries. I used it on the campaign. It is such an old-fashioned but beautiful term that suggests a bag with different items. Groceries went through the roof, and I campaigned on that, talking about the word a lot. I seriously do not think it can get more out of touch than this. Story 18. It's a banana, Michael. How much can it cost? $10? Rudy Giuliani. Story 19. As long as it is inevitable, you might as well lie back and enjoy it. Clayton Williams, a Republican from Texas and gubernatorial candidate in 1990, made this comparison of rape to the weather. Story 20. I spent most of my childhood living in a poorer part of California. When I was in high school, the state decided to build a new University of California campus, what is now the University of California, Merced. At the time, they were debating between two different sites. One of my high school teachers offered us extra credit if we would attend one of the public forums. At the open forum, a promoter of the site near where I grew up spoke about economic opportunities for the region that would follow the development of a university. Our state assemblyman refuted that claim, saying, "We do not need more education to make more money. We just need higher-paying companies to move here." When it was pointed out that companies had passed on the area because of its relatively low level of educational attainment, he replied, "We do not want those kinds of companies anyway." When someone asked, "We do not want companies that pay more money?" he answered, "No, we want companies that pay more, but we do not want companies that require a college degree to get hired." Basically, he wanted unicorns. The university was not built there. The area remains poor. Story 21. Of all the absurd, nonsensical remarks Trump has made, my favorite was when he referred to Hurricane Maria as one of the wettest we have seen, from the standpoint of water. Everything about it is just so funny to me. Story 22. I am the most popular president ever, and everyone considers me their favorite. Oops, that is too. I could not decide. Story 23. Senator Ted Stevens describing the internet as a series of tubes gave Jon Stewart years of comedy material. Story 24. Maybe not the most out of touch, but I am surprised it has not been posted yet. One of the ways you might relieve a little pressure on people paying so much for daycare is to make it possible for a grandparent, aunt, or uncle to help out more, said J.D. Vance, September 2024. And the rest of the United States of America collectively said, "Wow, thanks, JD. I never thought of asking a family member to look after my child. This will save me so much money. Thank goodness you are running for vice president." Sarcasm. Story 25. For 33 hours I prayed that if this had to happen here, it would not be one of us but somebody who came from another country. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I hoped. I thought it would make it easier on us if we could just say, "Hey, we don't do that here." Spencer Cox. Story 26. I am not a politician, but two examples of being out of touch come to mind. The chief executive officer of Kellogg said people should just eat cereal for dinner because they cannot afford groceries. The chief executive officer of Southwest said they are now charging for bags to return to the levels of profitability that we and our shareholders expect. These millionaire D-bags cannot help but say, "We are price gouging you to line our pockets. At least take us out to dinner first so we can be wined and dined before we get screwed." Story 27. That weird speech Boris Johnson gave about pink-eyed Terminators and how Alexa is a toe-tapping shrew. Story 28. Pokemon go to the polls. That whole part of the speech is almost poetic in its humor. From the shoehorned phrasing to the head nod afterward to the awkward smiles of those in the audience who do not get the reference. Story 29. United States Representative Hank Johnson said Guam would flip over and sink if 8,000 Marines were added to it. Story 30. Ever? I would have a hard time coming up with just one from this week. But now they are all busy scrubbing their social feeds because they discovered that the call, as usual, was coming from inside their house. Story 31. The person who claimed that Barack Obama was responsible for September 11th was either paid millions to say that or is one of the most foolish people of all time. Story 32. The leader of the Conservative Party in Canada knows almost nothing. He has held no jobs other than Member of Parliament and has no idea how even the most basic things work. Story 33. I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less. The radicals on the right are often radical because they don't want to see crime. They say they don't want these people coming here, they don't want you burning our shopping centers, and they don't want you shooting our people in the middle of the street. The radicals on the left are the problem. They're vicious and horrible, and they're politically savvy, although they want men in women's sports. They want transgender for everyone. They want open borders. Story 34. A local politician supporting affordable housing said people could move out of their tents, allowing other homeless people to move into the now unoccupied tents. Story 35. ScoMo was full of them. This is about Australians getting into homes. The best way to support people renting a house is to help them buy a house. Or, I do not own a house, mate. When he ran off to Hawaii for a holiday while the country was on fire, he did an interview with 60 Minutes Australian television in his re-election campaign to make himself, I do not know, seem more likable. That was so cringeworthy. Story 36. A politician in our country said that there is no issue with food prices because people can just go to McDonald's and eat a cheeseburger for $1.50. Unbelievable. Story 37. Michael Portillo, a patrician conservative minister in the United Kingdom, was down with the plebs and entered a fish and chip shop where he requested guacamole with his meal. Plebs do not eat guacamole in such places. They eat mushy peas. It was an easy mistake to make. Story 38. I cannot remember what he said, but George Bush did not know what a grocery scanner was. Story 39. Chu Shou-zi's testimony before the United States Senate felt like a comedy skit. Story 40. We have a term, groceries. It is an old term, but it means what you are buying, food. It is a fairly accurate term, although it sounds old-fashioned. Groceries, costs, and eggs are down. Story 41. When asked about the human immunodeficiency virus epidemic that was about to claim 700,000 lives in America, Reagan smirked, grinned, and chuckled. Abstinence is good. He did nothing. Pat Falwell said it was a plague sent by God. About 5,000 Americans still die from human immunodeficiency virus every year, and Reagan did nothing. He made many horrible statements. You see one tree, you've seen them all, he said about ancient coastal redwoods marked for Bay Area decks. I do not recall, he said about almost everything during a 3-year period of his presidency. You only think Donald Trump is the worst president if you did not live through the Reagan era. He allegedly smuggled huge amounts of cocaine into New York to fund the murder of Guatemalan coffee farmers and to fund Osama bin Laden, the man responsible for the September 11th attacks, using drug money. He has been described as the biggest cocaine profiteer since Pablo Escobar, but he did not keep the money. He allegedly hired Honduran death squads to kill coffee farmers in Guatemala and Nicaragua with drug money, while his wife promoted the drug abuse resistance education program in schools. It was the most awful 8 years. Story 42. Out of touch, you say? Mitt Romney's wife and, speaking about their financial struggles in a 1994 interview, said, they were not easy years. Neither one of us had a job because Mitt had enough of an investment in stock that we could sell off a little at a time. Story 43. Ben Carson said the pyramids were built to hold grain. Story 44. The guy who thought Guam would capsize if you put more troops on the island takes the cake by a mile. I haven't seen anything else that even comes close in the 15 years since he said this shit. Story 45. When George W. Bush was governor of Texas, he stood on the steps of the governor's mansion and said there were no hungry children in Texas in response to a newly published study. In clear view from his podium, a food giveaway and a line of hundreds of families with hungry children waited for food. Story 46. A few years ago, a Tory member of parliament named Peter Bottomley said it was really grim trying to live on a salary of just £80,000 per year. That is over twice the average annual salary in the United Kingdom. Story 47. A housing minister said it should not be hard to find a rental property for $200 per week in Sydney, Australia. The median weekly rent is about $900. Story 48. Justin Trudeau told a Canadian veteran who had lost a leg that they were asking for too much in pension benefits. Story 49. I think the alien chestbuster incident from the Senate discussions about eating irradiated shrimp may qualify. Story 50. Who was that guy the other week who thought contaminated shrimp were going to turn you into an alien monster? Story 51. If the English language was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for the children of Texas. Story 52. Chrystia Freeland said she did not own a car when asked about rising gas prices, but she did not mention that she is driven everywhere in a Government of Canada vehicle at taxpayers' expense. Story 53. Funny you should ask. It was just today that our very fine president told Faux News that he could not care less about bringing the country back together after the events of the last few days in America. Sad fucking outlook for the future. Story 54. Barnaby Joyce, an Australian politician, voted against the cervical cancer vaccine because he believed it would make women more promiscuous. Story 55. Orange billionaire said, "I'm proud to be the president for the workers, not the outsourcers. The president who stands up for Main Street, not Wall Street. Who protects the middle class, not the political class. This is why he has surrounded himself with billionaires." Story 56. Tom Cotton. There is no genocide. There is no famine. Palestine is a lie. Story 57. Nancy Pelosi. We have to pass the bill to know what is in it. Story 58. I will never forget a video of a man who strapped his dog to the roof of his car, the same man with the dancing horses, Mitt Romney, on his campaign tour. He was making small talk in the most robotic voice possible and said he loved the weather when it was warm outside or something like that. It was so strange. Also Dr. Us calling a vegetable platter crudité. Story 59. A candidate for Seattle City Council claimed that rent is not getting too expensive here. That is tone deaf. Story 60. The congressman asked whether Guam could tip over if too many people live there. Story 61. Italy and the United States of America have been friends for thousands of years, going back to Roman times. Story 62. Responding to a news article from The Onion without catching the irony. Story 63. Any quote ever from Republicans from 2017 to the present. I did not forget Hillary's Pokemon Go to the polls moment. It was extremely cringy. Story 64. Judith Collins claimed a 1 kilogram block of cheese cost $4 to $5. At the time, the specific variety she was referring to, tasty cheese, cost about $18. Story 65. Companies are people too, Mitt Romney said. Actually, I think he should have added, under United States law. Story 66. Kim Campbell, Canadian Prime Minister, served one of the shortest terms in Canadian history. During a general election campaign in the early 1990s, she said, "An election is no time to discuss serious issues." Campbell later said her statement was distorted by the media and that she meant the 47-day election campaign did not offer enough time to discuss serious issues. The damage was done. Her party was devastated in the subsequent election, winning only 2 seats, and Campbell lost her own seat in the House of Commons. It is hard to imagine any politician making such a tone-deaf, out-of-touch comment during an election campaign. Story 67. I will offer anyone here $50 an hour if you will go pick lettuce in Yuma for the whole season. John McCain, 2006. Story 68. The internet is a series of tubes. Ted Stevens, Republican of Alaska, was head of the Senate committee responsible for regulating the internet. Story 69. Trump did not know what the word groceries meant until 2024. Story 70. Honestly, just put on a blindfold and throw a dart at the last 8 months of problems we have had. It is so out of touch, it is not funny. Story 71. This is not hilarious. One of the leading figures in the most powerful right-wing party in Germany claimed Hitler was a communist. Alice Weidel lives in Switzerland and is married to a woman from Sri Lanka. Her position is hypocritical. Story 72. If you get the vaccine, you cannot get it or spread it. Liar. Story 73. There are too many to choose from. It is probably about eating pets or airports during the Revolutionary War. Story 74. Almost anything about their invisible sky friend who judges and performs magic. Story 75. Just about anything that comes out of the mango turd's mouth. Story 76. A man said that if he were elected president, he would fund and organize matchmaking events through government programs so the younger generation would marry and have more children. Our birth rate is rapidly declining. Story 77. Pretty much anything that comes out of the mouth of a certain orange-painted moron. Story 78. The Declaration of Independence was a declaration of love and unity. Story 79. If you have a problem figuring out if you are for me or Donald Trump, then you are not black. Joe Biden. Story 80. During the financial crisis, Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania was working on a bill to change National Football League broadcasts, so his constituents could watch the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles on television. That was not the right time. Story 81. Hank Johnson said that if too many soldiers were put on the island of Guam, it would tip over and capsize. He is still in the house. Story 82. The internet is a series of tubes. Honorable mention. Please clap. Story 83. During the early 1980s, lake acidification was an issue due to sulfur in coal. We have raised the lake pH to nearly 7. Okay, but we are not going to stop until we get it to 0. Story 84. Suburban women, please like me. You already know who the fuck I am. Story 85. Trump stated that gasoline cost less than $2 a gallon in most states across the United States. Story 86. If you have never seen this man complain about Snoopy Poop Dog, you should watch it. It is a classic. Story 87. An old-fashioned term that we use is groceries. I used it during the campaign. It is a beautiful term. Groceries means a bag with different things in it. Donald Jennifer Trump. Story 88. Years ago, someone running for state representative said, students' median test score of 50% is too low. Story 89. They said they would fix the student loan crisis by giving graduating entrepreneurs 3 years before they have to start repaying their loans. Story 90. We know times are tough. You might need to cut back on costs. In our house, we cut back on our Disney Plus subscription. Story 91. Did you check the news today? Not that today is special, but they seem to outdo themselves every day. For about 10 years, I have heard the most ridiculous things a politician can say. Story 92. Nothing comes to mind, but I am positive Jacob Rees-Mogg said it. Story 93. In 2006, Alaska Senator Ted Stevens, a Republican, was giving a speech on the Senate floor and said, "The internet is a series of tubes." Story 94. The rent for a one-bedroom apartment in my city was $600 per month at a time when it was almost twice that amount. Story 95. Not doing Trump or George W. Bush, too easy. Romney had some good ones in 2012. Binders full of women. The trees are the right height. There is always the old Bill Clinton classic. That depends on what the meaning of is. Story 96. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, March 27, 2023, on X, formerly Twitter. How much testosterone and how many medications for mental illness was the transgender Nashville school shooter taking? Everyone can stop blaming guns now. Story 97. Right now there is an overload of out-of-touch comments. Looking back in the archives, I remember Ron Paul, a libertarian from Pennsylvania, at a town hall arguing that the government should not put students in debt with student loans. Someone asked how students who cannot afford college would get an education, and he replied that they should get summer jobs. When the student pointed out that they could not pay tuition on the minimum wage, Ron Paul said that college would have to cost less. The student laughed. Story 98. Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass the bill so you can find out what is in it. Story 99. Ralph Northam would have moonwalked at his press conference to address his blackface scandal if not for his wife Pam. I cannot recall what triggered this impulse to demonstrate moonwalking skills, but there was no way he could have continued as governor if he had given in to his baser instincts and ignored the not-so-gentle suggestion from the woman who almost certainly raised him. But you be the judge. Story 100. Pokemon Go to the polls has been stuck in my head for a while. I am not a Trump supporter at all, but this was hilariously out of touch. Story 101. What day is it? It seems increasingly hilarious and out of touch. Story 102. I'm here for the little guy. Longtime Republican Senator Alphonse D'Amato, known as Al, lost to Chuck Schumer in the next election cycle. Story 103. During the last general election in New Zealand, our current Prime Minister was asked how much he spends on groceries per week and answered $60. Story 104. Donald Trump is doing a great job, and there are many flattering statements to that effect. It exposed perceived shallowness and a lack of conviction among some Republican leaders. Story 105. People are entitled to their sexual proclivities. Let 1,000 blossoms bloom, as far as I am concerned. But I am not spending any time on it because, in the meantime, every 3 months someone is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland. Bob Catter, Australian Member of Parliament for Kennedy, Queensland. Story 106. I cannot access external links. Please paste the article text here and I will edit it for Azure text-to-speech. Story 107. Some Democrats are trying to win votes from men. Story 108. I wish I could tell you, but they seem to outdo themselves daily. Story 109. The geriatric pedophile party brings something increasingly out of touch to the table daily. How can anyone possibly keep up? Story 110. I believe I remember Donald Trump claiming that health insurance costs $12 per month. Story 111. Trump said this morning that radical right-wingers are vigilantes trying to fight for justice against the radical left. Story 112. I am a man of the people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. Sir Jacob William Rees-Mogg. Story 113. A few years ago, then 86-year-old Senator Chuck Grassley tweeted about a dead bird on the ground. It would have been out of touch for your grandfather to text that to you, let alone for a senator to tweet about it publicly. Story 114. The then Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, wondered why federal workers did not just take out bridge loans to tide them through a possible government shutdown, since it had always worked for him. Story 115. If you are a single mother with 2 children, which is the toughest job in America as far as I am concerned, and you are working hard to put food on the table for your family. George Walker Bush. Story 116. He was talking to a group of soldiers after one of their comrades had died in battle and said that sometimes shit happens. He also bit into a raw onion, skin and all, while touring a farm. Story 117. I do not have the time to type out all the things Donald Trump and the political right say. Story 118. The fat, narcissistic, egotistical, lying, hypocritical, needle-dicked bigot currently occupying the White House, and any of his cult members are close seconds. Story 119. To tell you the truth, I understand what my constituents need. Story 120. Senator Ted Stevens described the internet as a series of tubes in its early days. The audio is actually funny. Story 121. People say we make enough money and should stop buying things like avocado toast. You are bought and paid for by big corporations. Try living on what we earn and see how long you survive. Story 122. They said to me, don't worry, we can just use a virtual private network. And I was shocked. I can't find the clip, but the context is the United Kingdom's Online Safety Act. Story 123. That we Americans are open to a dictator was spoken by the Orange Man himself. Story 124. They are eating the cats and the dogs. Hysterical. Story 125. Multiple Australian politicians, including the Prime Minister at the time, could not say how much a loaf of bread cost. This shows they were not only out of touch with the cost of living but also unable to handle a simple question. One of the simplest questions exposed them as ineffective leaders. Meanwhile, in New Zealand you can literally bump into our former Prime Minister at the shops. Story 126. It was obvious at the time that the entire mission accomplished banner by President Bush would end badly. Story 127. My uncle was a doctor, so I know everything about viruses. Story 128. He suggested drinking bleach and disinfectant to cure coronavirus disease, but when he contracted it, Trump chose to go to the hospital instead of taking his own suggested treatment. Story 129. Getting on the plane and returning to America. Also, Trump had a chat with the President of the United States Virgin Islands. Story 130. During their debate, Romney argued that Russia was threatening to invade neighboring countries and to undermine United States elections. Obama replied, Russia? The Cold War is over. Russia isn't a threat to anyone. You're living in the past and we need to move forward. He was not out of touch. He was appealing to American voters and made Romney look bad. Had Obama spoken honestly about Russia and made it a priority, Hillary Clinton might not have paid Russia for intelligence on Trump, Trump might not have been elected, and Russia might have stayed out of Ukraine. Story 131. Chrystia Freeland, a member of the Liberal Party of Canada with a locked-in pension and a net worth of approximately $3 million, told Canadians they should cancel their Disney Plus subscriptions to better afford the rising cost of living while she was serving as Minister of Finance. She later apologized and acknowledged her privilege, but the remarks damaged her remaining public approval. Story 132. The questions that were asked during the Facebook and TikTok congressional hearings made me lose faith in our leadership. They have no clue how the internet and technology work. Story 133. With all the wind farms going up, it is slowing the Earth's rotation. Or, with all the solar panels, we are sucking up all of the sun and will fizzle out. Story 134. I'm here for you. Trust me. Story 135. That idiot Reagan said trees cause more pollution than cars. Story 136. Guam could capsize. Story 137. There was a hurricane, and someone suggested using a nuclear weapon to destroy it. Story 138. During President Bush's administration, an official was asked how much a gallon of milk cost and replied $25, which was far from the actual price. Story 139. It was particularly informative when Kamala explained that space is like big to a group of astronauts with doctoral degrees. Story 140. An electric vehicle will go across the United States on a single tank of gas. Maybe not out of touch, but still funny. Story 141. There are many more affordable rehabilitation centers in the range of $20,000 per month. Story 142. I interned for a United States Senator 25 years ago, a very wealthy one, and I remember him walking into a breakfast we were having and asking if we had the chocolate milk with that bunny on it. Who does not know it is called the Nesquik bunny? Story 143. They are facing an existential threat. This is not genocide. Story 144. She and her husband liked the tasty cheese and said it only cost $5 for a large block. Everyone else said, "Crusher. That cheese actually costs $20. Story 145. I am not a crook. Was way up there until I heard, they're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Story 146. In Australia, we had a dickhead prime minister who decided to give the then living Prince Philip an honorific. No one in Australia, including his own party, thought it was a good idea. Story 147. Jean-François Copé a déclaré de façon célèbre qu'un pain au chocolat coûtait entre 10 et 15 centimes. En réalité, il coûte plutôt entre 1,50 € et 3 ou 4 € selon la boulangerie. Cette remarque est devenue emblématique du décalage total des responsables politiques par rapport à la vie quotidienne. Story 148. Dog. I'm an American. I don't know. Probably when the president suggested we could inject light or bleach into our blood to kill coronavirus disease 2019. Story 149. There are no Epstein files. Your attorney general showed them to journalists as a prop. Story 150. Marjorie Taylor Greene said Jewish space lasers caused California wildfires. Story 151. Mitt Romney on affording college. Ask your parents for a loan. Shop around for the best deal on tuition. Story 152. At one point, members of Congress debated cutting food stamps because they believed people making $500,000 a year qualified for them. This had something to do with median income versus average income. It was obvious that members of Congress had no idea how government assistance programs work. Story 153. My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize, said Hank Johnson, a Democrat and congressman from Georgia, referring to the military buildup on Guam. Story 154. My fear is that the whole island of Guam will become so overly populated by Marines that it will tip over and capsize. Representative Hank Johnson, 2010. Story 155. We have an extreme housing bubble or crisis in Australia. A conservative politician said it was not that bad, but when asked how many properties they owned, they replied that they did not know, for goodness sake. Story 156. Selected statements by Dan Quayle. I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix. I am the vice president. They know it and they know that I know it. I stand by my misstatements. I did, in fact, eat graham crackers, drink milk, and take naps in kindergarten. He also misspelled the word potato. Story 157. Not nearly as bad as some others here. But during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, our prime minister at the time offered the following remark. It was during an interview, and the interviewer told her that those working in the restaurant and bar business were reaching the point where they could not afford basic necessities, and she responded, well, maybe they could not afford it before the pandemic either. As if having your income drop to zero because your workplace is closed and cannot make money has no effect on your finances. If you are out of luck, you are already living above your means. Story 158. When Rick Scott asked the wealthy members of Congress, "Do you want to be poor?" As of mid-2025, estimates place Senator Rick Scott's net worth at over $500 million, making him one of the wealthiest members of Congress. Rick Scott was the chief executive officer of Columbia Hospital Corporation of America, which pleaded guilty to 14 felonies and paid a record $1.7 billion in fines and penalties for Medicare fraud. Scott was never criminally charged or pardoned in connection with the case. Story 159. Scott Morrison said, "It's not a race," when asked about the coronavirus disease 2019 vaccine rollout. The same man went on holiday to Hawaii while Australia was being ravaged by bushfires. For your information. Story 160. Airports were closed during the Revolutionary War. George Washington's flight was delayed on the tarmac at LaGuardia Airport. Story 161. We could cancel our Disney Plus or Netflix subscriptions to save money, rather than expecting the government to stop spending so much and to deal with the crippling housing crisis and skyrocketing inflation. Story 162. There is a famous Swedish clip from a town hall meeting in the 1990s in which residents are angry about an issue I do not recall. It may be about the closure of a school or another local social service. Amid the loud argument, a government official stands up and asks everyone to quiet down, join hands, and sing "We Shall Overcome Together." Story 163. Justice Jackson is not a politician but a Supreme Court justice. During a recent case about opting children out of classes with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer content, she asked if parents who do not like what is taught in public schools cannot simply homeschool or send their children to private school. This overlooks that many families cannot afford for a parent to stop working to homeschool their children or to pay for private school. Story 164. Didn't Nancy Pelosi do a segment called "Here's What's in My Fridge" with Stephen Colbert during the coronavirus disease 2019 period, when millions were losing their jobs? Story 165. Did someone say solar panels absorb sunlight in a way that leaves less for everyone else? Story 166. You do not get free health care, Mike Flood said. The entire crowd booed. Story 167. Do you own a business? Asked a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to a homeless man who was there for a free breakfast. Story 168. French Prime Minister François Bayrou, at least until last Monday, proposed eliminating 2 public holidays to reduce France's debt. One of them was Victory Day. Given that anti-Semitism is rising across Europe, and in France in particular, the irony is striking. Story 169. Rising ocean levels are caused by rocks falling from cliffs into the water. Mo Brooks. Story 170. I do not support a livable wage. Karen Handel, Republican, former member of the United States House of Representatives from Georgia. Story 171. Australia must digitally penetrate Asia. John Howard, Australia. He did get rid of the guns, though. Yes, we have a functioning democracy. Story 172. Friedrich Merz is a man of the middle class with a private jet. Story 173. Going really old school, but back in the 1960s, Nelson Rockefeller told a group of blue-collar workers, "Take your average man making $100,000 a year." Story 174. The Mexicans descend from the Indians, the Brazilians descend from the jungle, but we Argentinians descend from the ships. Alberto Fernandez. Story 175. Rishi Sunak says we are all in this together when talking about businesses struggling during the coronavirus pandemic, while he and his wife are worth £650 million. Story 176. In an interview years ago, a unionist politician in Northern Ireland said that a gay man has the right to marry a woman. That was an incredibly stupid thing to say. Story 177. A French billionaire recently went on live television to tell the public how to save money. For example, he said he had plenty of advice and suggested that when an employee leaves, they should not be replaced. This did not go well. Story 178. Politicians measure poverty in yachts the way we measure it in rent. Story 179. Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, March 3, 2020. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody and continued to do so. Boris spent 3 days on oxygen at St. Thomas Hospital in April 2020. Story 180. Leo Varadkar, regarding young people unable to make a down payment on a house, said just ask the bank of mom and dad. It is the most upper middle class thing he has ever said. He clearly came from money. Story 181. This Republican is asking whether we can change the moon's or the Earth's orbit to affect climate change. Story 182. A minister in Serbia said that buying 2 eggs is enough food for an entire day. Story 183. Mitt Romney's $10,000 bet in front of an audience, as if it were normal, is up there. Story 184. Those who work for €530 a month should be asked, why cannot you work for €2,000 a month? Friedrich Merz. Should the people who cannot afford bread just eat cake too? What the fuck? Story 185. During the Conservative Party expenses scandal, I remember hearing about a member of parliament who had claimed £16,000 back for a bespoke handmade bookshelf he had made for his house. When interviewed and asked to justify this, he responded that he lived in a Grade I listed manor house and could hardly go to John Lewis and buy one. I had no idea that the average Brit dreams of being able to afford John Lewis furniture. Story 186. The claim that Republicans are not easily radicalized is a bald-faced lie. Story 187. This is probably just an honorable mention, but Hillary Clinton's implication that men who die in war are not victims, while women who survive wars are, has consistently struck me as remarkably tone-deaf. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.